reading solubility graphs. You're going to answer the questions on this page using the information in the reading material. First, I'm going to show you the information in the reading material that tells you what all these different terms mean. And that's right here on reading a solubility chart. If something is, well, let's start with saturated. If something is saturated, if a solution is saturated, that means it is holding exactly the amount of the solute that can be held in that amount of solvent. So if something is saturated, I have dissolved absolutely as much of that certain substance into the solvent as will absolutely be held in there at that temperature. Okay? So if something is saturated, when I look at the solubility chart, this shows me how much will dissolve at each temperature. So it tells me the temperature down here. Let me move this up so we can see it. It tells me the temperature here and how many grams of solute would be able to dissolve in 100 grams of water. And if I look at these, notice they pretty much usually go up. Some of them do go down. All right, but if I were looking at, for example, KNO3 here, I know that at 30 degrees Celsius, almost 50 grams of the substance would dissolve in a saturated solution. All right, this line shows me how much can dissolve at each temperature. If I have something that is unsaturated, it means I can still dissolve more. So for that 30-degree mark that we were just looking at, if I have something less than that, if I had only 30 grams in my 100 grams of water at 30 degrees Celsius, I could still dissolve more before it would be saturated. So unsaturated is an amount that's below that solubility line. So anything below that 48 or so that looks like can dissolve in there, anything below that, if I put less than that in there, then I have an unsaturated solution. Supersaturated would have more dissolved in it than should be possible. See how this line keeps going up? If I were to heat up my water, I could dissolve more KNO3 into my solution. If I then cool it back down without disturbing it and leave it alone, then that amount, a good part of that, or possibly all of it, will stay dissolved in the water. And so I would actually have more dissolved in it than should be able to dissolve in there. And we call that supersaturated. So I may have warmed it up, dissolved 60 grams of KNO3 in my water, and then cooled it back down, and now I have 60 grams dissolved when I really should only be able to dissolve 48 grams, and we call that supersaturated. So you're going to use this chart to determine the amounts of everything that you are determining in these questions. So when it asks at about what temperature, make sure that you find the information and then bring your line down to temperature. If it asks how many grams will dissolve, make sure that you go over to the left-hand side for how many grams of solute will dissolve. And then when it asks you, is the solution saturated, unsaturated, or supersaturated, you're going to determine is the amount that it tells you on the line, below the line, or above the line. So let's do this example together for number 4. If 32 grams of KClO3 are dissolved in 100 grams of water at 20 degrees Celsius, is it saturated, unsaturated, or supersaturated? So I'm going to find KClO3. Here's KClO3. This is the line for KClO3's solubility. And it says 32 grams are dissolved at 20 degrees Celsius. So I find 20 degrees Celsius and come up here to 32 grams, which is going to be about there. Well, here's my KClO3 line, and the amount that I've put in there is more than can dissolve normally at that temperature. So I would say, instead of this amount being in there, since this amount is in there, I would say this is super saturated because it has more in it than should be able to dissolve, and I would put super saturated here. Don't let this 100 grams of water throw you off, because your graph says right here that all of these represent the number of grams of solute that can dissolve in 100 grams of water. So all of these are talking about in 100 grams of water. So don't pay attention to the 100 grams of water. That's going to be true for all of these. So just pay attention to the temperature and how many grams should be able to dissolve. and you'll answer these questions as you go. If you do still have any questions about the answers to these or how you should find them, please do come ask.